So the function of a hub would be to constrain and to integrate. So it will bring activity from different regions in the brain into a common center where the activity can be integrated. And so that's the function of a hub, really, is to bring disparate activity from different places into something cohesive. If you think of it analogous to a road junction, that different routes to different places are brought together at this common junction. And it's very true of particularly one hub in the brain, the posterior cingulate cortex, where a number of different networks actually in the brain are all represented within this one spatially local unit. We found that psilocybin deactivated these hub structures, so that was kind of surprising. We were thinking, because people describe the experience as being mind expanding, they refer to psychedelic drugs as broadening consciousness. So it's kind of surprising to see that psilocybin actually decreased activity in these hub structures. The level of integration or connectivity between the hub structure and other regions, which are usually actually especially connected with the hub, was decreased. So there was a kind of literal disconnect. These hub structures are like the shepherd or the herdsman or the conductor of an orchestra. So under psychedelics, it's like the conductor leaves the room, and then the orchestra no longer plays its usual coherent stream, and you don't have the usual harmony there. You have something a lot more sort of dissonant, maybe a lot more experimental perhaps. So people often describe the psychedelic state as being sort of a freeing of thinking, a kind of dissolving of our usual style of thinking. And so that's why people have vivid imagination, why our perception changes and becomes more kind of fluid and strange. That literal kind of constraining function of a hub to limit, to keep things together, to keep things working synchronously, seems to be associated with a consistent and a coherent narrative. It keeps things predictable, and there's a certain familiarity to our experience, that our interactions with the world aren't surprising and they don't feel especially novel. We can experience novel things and be captivated by them, but we can also explain them away quite quickly. They lose their novelty and we're not too perturbed by them. But in the psychedelic state, we can be very perturbed by things in the world as we go about and experience them. And in general, the state seems to have a kind of underlying uncertainty. This kind of strangeness of our experience of the world is very prevalent. The visual system is a classic example of how the brain is organized hierarchically. So you have at the very, very lowest level the retina, light-sensitive cells, and then you have that information passed on to the visual nuclei of the thalamus, this hub in the middle of the brain, and then you get that information sent back to the primary visual cortex, and then it's passed up into high-level representations, all the way up to faces. And what you see with psychedelics is that the visual modality particularly is disturbed. What people often report is things like geometric hallucinations, motion, hallucinating motion in things that are static. So they may describe the walls breathing, things melting, and they may see faces and things as well. So what you're seeing is that at levels of a visual hierarchy where you usually have that function sort of suppressed out, that region may do that function. It may sort of offer a model or a prediction of a face or of motion, but it's usually suppressed. It's kept quiet. Then under a psychedelic, there's a breakdown of the entire hierarchy in such a way that layers of the hierarchy can become manifest. So you can start seeing faces popping out of walls and this kind of thing. It's a perceptual error, but it's a function of how the perceptual system works. So what we're seeing are predictions. They're the brain's predictions, but they're just wrong predictions. So we might predict this face in the wall because the brain's very adept at predicting faces because they're everywhere. And we're often processing faces, but you're just seeing something which should be suppressed out come up, and then you get these errors. So its implications are quite profound because it suggests where's the reality without a brain to piece together and to construct reality. So it's saying very strongly that reality is a construction. At least that's what the science is telling us, is that we construct reality, and that when we're infants and before then, we have in a sense, we just have pure unreality. Reality only becomes something as we piece it together. So long as you recognize that is a construction, It's not necessary to do away with the whole thing and start a new construction. It's just necessary to be aware of it. In the psychedelic state, people often get kind of giggly and things are kind of silly and funny. But there's also deeper levels to this term of regression. In psychotherapy in the 50s and 60s, it was found that people sometimes had vivid recollections or even relivings of past experiences. And in these cases, sometimes they'd go as far as to say that they felt like they were a child again and that they were 9 years old and this was happening and these events were playing out. People's style of thinking becomes much less analytical and perhaps rational, and it becomes more magical, more fantasy-based. And that suggests a kind of regression, perhaps not just on an individual development level, but actually on a kind of evolutionary level, as if we go back to a state in our evolution where we did think more primitively,